Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here for the first Wednesday webinar for FTS. Really appreciate you taking the time. Joining me today to present is Sean Bethel, who's going to go through the presentation. But without further ado, I wanted to pass it over to Sean Bethel, who's our Director of Wildfire Mitigation Planning. Sean?
Well, thanks again, Bill. And good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Bethel, in-house wildfire mitigation specialist for Forest Technology Systems. I'm super excited to talk to everyone today about a topic I'm very passionate about. It's very close to my heart, and that's wildfire management and wildfire mitigation. Our webinar today is Wildfire Situational Awareness, Embracing Our Wildfire Realities. And we're going to talk about today is weather monitoring and predictive tools to enhance situational awareness and create a common operating picture to better mitigate wildfire. Today, we'll share some insights about understanding wildfire risk, existing tools to monitor and predict wildfire threats, lessons learned from wildfire agencies, and how these could be leveraged to utility wildfire mitigation planning. Now, through this session, a lot of this material will be targeted to the electric utility wildfire mitigation planning, but a lot of what we're talking about in the situational awareness technologies apply to wildfire management agencies and a wide variety of emergency response agencies. I hope through this presentation we'll share insights with the webinar participants that everyone will have some takeaways at the end of it that will help benefit your organization and your wildfire mitigation planning and wildfire management efforts. Before we start talking about the situational awareness technology solutions that monitor weather, predict wildfire danger, and forecast wildfire behavior that escalates the risk around us, just allow me a few minutes to introduce myself and FTS to provide some context towards how we got to this point. We're talking today about wildfire mitigation. So my wildfire career started in 1985. I was in the Northern Interior of British Columbia, and I was planting trees. And there was a big fire in the horizon, a massive convection column hidden in the sky. And my crew was around me, and we were a little bit nervous about it. And the Green Forest Service truck pulled up. And the guy got out, as a fire manager, and he said, "Okay, guys, we need you over on the fire." So we traded in our tree planting shovels for our fire suppression shovel. And that was really the birth of a long career, over 30 years in wildfire. And I was really proud to work with the British Columbia Wildfire Service for about 25 years. In that time, I worked with the rappel crew for about 10 years, gaining access into remote forested areas to access initial attack wildfires, 3-person crews, typically attacking lightning-caused wildfires. I later got into air ops roles, doing helicopter and fixed-wing attack. And really that was where I was passionate about, most passionate about was the air attack side of the wildfire. It's a lot of fun, obviously, working around helicopters and planes. Very exciting and very dynamic environment. A little bit dangerous at times too, but in order to become an air attack officer or become a helicopter manager, you had to get a nationally certified course called the Fire Behavior Analyst, an FBAN. So I went through that thinking, okay, my goal is to become an air attack officer, but in the time of taking that course, about 3 different courses and several weeks of instruction and some operational activities, really opened my eyes to weather, topography, and fuel, really the 3 pillars of fire behavior. And in that, and we're going to talk, as we get into situational awareness more a bit later, that was really the genesis of my understanding of wildfire, and also learning about companies like Forest Technology Systems that make the weather stations that give the data that allow you to understand what's going on out there in the wildfire in our landscapes. So later in my career, I worked as an incident commander, incident management teams in different roles. I've fought fire in North America, Australia, Europe, and Latin America. And I'm really proud to have worked with some really incredible professionals, colleagues, co-workers through a lot of different projects. I worked on many projects internationally. Some of you may recall the haze management issues in the late 90s in Indonesia and Malaysia. I worked on CETA-funded projects there, CETA tech transfer projects for a 4-year period in Argentina. I've been involved in various post-fire season reviews and audits in Australia, and other countries, including Portugal, British Columbia in more recent years. I was, for a while there, also worked on international cross-border wildfire cooperation agreements. So that was our Northwest Compact with the Northwestern states and provinces and territories in Canada, as well as the agreements with Australia. In fact, for me, it's very rewarding to see in recent years the sharing of resources between Australia and Canada. And two of those agreements, I was actually one of the original authors on those, going back quite a few years now. So really rewarding to see those being implemented and used to their fullest extent. And one of the roles that I'm most proud of really is the Provincial Fire Control Officer, also known as a Fire Management Officer. And that was a role where in a weekly rotation, you'd be in charge of all the firefighting assets in British Columbia, where we have 200 million acres of responsibility. About 60% of that's forested, about 2,000 wildfires annually, and about 50% of those are caused by lightning. So later when we start talking about situational awareness technologies, I'll sort of go blast from the past and share some of the panels that we looked at in our fire control room to aid us in making really good decisions, timely decisions when they're needed most. In more recent years, I've worked in the private sector. I've gone on about 13 years now. I've worked with wildfire suppression manufacturing technology companies, for example, Bambi Bucket, which many of you are familiar with, slinging under a helicopter. I've worked with fire ignition products, Primo fire ignition products for aerial ignition of prescribed fires, but also being used to light fire in a controlled fire situation and managing large wildfire incidents. And then I also worked for some aviation-related aerial firefighting companies. So I'm really proud to be now working with Forest Technology Systems just in the past year or so, and helping them to have the market, especially the electric utility markets, understand and realize that Forest Technology Systems has a long breadth of knowledge and experience dealing with wildfire. So a little bit about Forest Technology Systems. We're part of advanced environmental monitoring. I'll talk to that in the next slide, but FTS was founded by a British Columbia wildland firefighter, and talking about in the early 80s, in sort of the pioneering days, inception periods of the development of the Canadian Forest Fire Danger Rating System. So FTS was around for a lot of that development, and really the key and fundamental thing that FTS brought to the market was a remote automated weather station. Typically before that, Environment Canada and other weather stations were out there, were at airports and areas that were not in the remote areas where the wildfires were occurring, or where prescribed burning was being planned for, without having a lot of knowledge of the on-site specific weather parameters, which is super important when you're planning to light up a big burn, for example, or manage a large wildfire incident. So really what they brought was this robust, reliable weather monitoring device with experience with field installations and the technical support to the meteorological and wildfire community. And we've been doing that for 40 years now. Over that time, we've developed a large and extensive network of over 5,000 remote automated weather stations globally. So I mentioned Advanced Environmental Monitoring. That's the private equity company based in the US. With that company started about 2 years ago and collected a group of innovative environmental companies, experts in their field. So we now have really a combination of 370 years of combined expertise with 400 industry experts, all dealing with environmental monitoring and hydrological solutions. For example, lightning network, early warning detection and dangerous thunderstorm alert forecasting, precision weather and climate monitoring, sensors and software for agricultural sector, flood warning, hydrological solutions, monitoring, alerting, and of course, wildfire situational awareness. So who we serve, Forest Technology Systems has worked with more than 50 US wildfire agencies in North America. We've worked with Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, the National Interagency Forest Fire Center in Boise, Idaho. Of course, all the provincial and territorial wildfire and wildland management agencies across Canada. And all the sub-agencies under the Department of Interior, which are part of the National Wildfire Coordination Group, all listed below there: U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, Bureau of Land Management, Indian Affairs, National Parks, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, including U.S. Geo Surveys and Environment Canada, and the Government of Australia. And specifically with states, Victoria State and New South Wales, they have implemented there a network of FTS automated weather stations. So we're quite proud of that, to have the ability to support the Australian wildfire agencies in a big way. So some of our utility customers, I was actually participating in a wildfire mitigation forum last week. Chris Arends, Brian D'Agostino, and John Waldemariam from San Diego Gas and Electric were going back. They were talking about incredible developments they've had, and they have really a cutting edge, trailblazer, if you will, in terms of electric utility and emergency operations center that they have to have complete situational awareness down in their areas of interest in Southern California. And they were talking about the inception of that about 12 years ago when they first bought their FTS, remote automated weather stations. And so since then, there have been other companies we've worked with. Of course, Wildfire, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, the changes, the upward trend with more fire and more electric utility companies very concerned about wildfire threats, not only to their own assets and infrastructure, but to the threats to the communities around their areas of responsibility. The wildfire danger, we often see the colorful maps on the news or in the newspaper or online, and this really is the core essence of preparedness and prevention. Many of you see on the roadsides the fire alert signs to let you know what the wildfire hazard is. And really all this, the data that feeds this spatial display of information is coming from FTS, remote automated weather stations. So when we talk about wildfire danger, the little black dots you see there is the network that supports the National Fire Danger Rating System in the United States. There are over 3,500 stations collecting hourly weather data, disseminating that, broadcasting that across the wildfire management community. A very specific set of data parameters that identify accuracy, frequency of sharing that information. And all this information is based on a standard. So we have I mentioned the National Wildfire Coordination Group, and this is the group that sets the standards and establishes the requirements for what a weather station should have. For example, the weather parameters should be, how they're measured, how accurate it needs to be, the decimal places, frequency of the sensor sample, and how frequently it should transmit, where the equipment should be installed and placed in the landscape, and how often the equipment should be maintained. A lot of other factors go into it. The main point in this is to say that there are standards in place with all the key wildland fire management agencies in the United States, and the FTS RAW station is the only vendor or the only company that meets that standard in this sector. So in terms of real-time weather, this is really where we start getting into talking about situational awareness, because this is really the fundamental part of situational awareness. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, that if you don't know what your workload is, you're going to have a really hard time at being successful at wildfire management. So it comes down to having a real-time awareness of what the weather's doing out there. The environment's changing. So, but one of the biggest advantages of a real-time weather station network is that these can be attached and installed on existing infrastructure. So there's a low cost of that, a greater density of data collection, and real-time data that supports modeling that's out there. There's all kinds of modeling, whether it's fuels modeling or fire growth modeling. It all comes down to the data. And if the data is not accurate, then really what you're looking at in terms of spatial display of information that you're using to make decisions is not going to be optimal. So we are in FTS really focusing in on the accuracy of the predictive services and the forecasting capability, because better situational awareness at site-specific and in regional areas, knowing what the extreme weather forecasting is going to be, is really what's going to help you make the most important decisions at the critical time. So in between all this, the map before showed the network of 3,500 automated weather stations, but there are a lot of gaps out there. And so what we've identified is a market need, an industry need for filling those gaps with portable and compact weather stations to fill those in and understand what the true wildfire risk is, not just where those 3,500 weather stations are, but all the areas in between. So we're all looking at a shared reality these days. I mean, all of us have seen images just like there on the slide of big, nasty wildfires, or through the summer months on the news, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock news every day. And we're seeing an uptick in this. But we're all going through this together. So with those realities come the challenges. We have our wildfire environments changing globally. We have all kinds of different stakeholders involved. Our wildfire management tools, technologies, and methods of operations need to adapt to these changes in the environment. We have ongoing climate change, the fuels changing. We have different composition, different types of continuity out there, an abundance of it due to other circumstances, or we could say quite boldly neglect of fuels management over decades of time. But we're seeing with the climate change and the fuel, a lot of other issues at play there, but population growth and expanding WUI, but uptick and trending up in extreme fire behavior, longer wildfire seasons. And with that comes the increased liability, increased cost, and way more risk out there. At a recent wildfire summit, I learned the stat that over the last 50 years, there's been a 400% increase in the frequency of wildfires in the United States. I mean, that's a compelling stat in itself. 50 years in the wider scope of things is actually not that long a period of time. So all indications are it's trending up. Unfortunately, California is always on, the stats are being repeated, constantly about the more recent wildfire seasons. 2018 resulting in over 100 fatalities and $20 billion in damage. It's unbelievable. And it's not just in California. We're seeing it in all parts of North America, including Canada. Australia, of course, has been in the news of late, and of course, Eastern Europe, even Asia and Africa. And we're seeing, incredible stories of wildfires in Greenland and Iceland and other areas where don't traditionally have fire weather. Even in the Arctic, I think it was recorded 30 degrees Celsius a few weeks back. We're seeing massive fires down in Arizona and New Mexico right now. And in terms of Canada, we all lived through it here in British Columbia, but of the last 5 fire seasons, 3 of those have been record-setting seasons. Previously, my first wildfire season was 1985, and that beat a record from 1958. And we used to see kind of more of a El Nino, La Nina cyclical trend of every 4 or 5 years, we'd have one doozy of a fire season, but we're seeing that now it's almost every season in some jurisdictions or every other season. So that sort of 4 to 5 year cyclical trend has really just seemingly disappeared. So when we talk about wildfire mitigation planning, we're often talking about a very specific strategy, and sort of where I came through in my career, and a lot of people that come through the wildfire agencies really look at wildfire management as a whole. So mitigation steps are within these, but when we talk about wildfire management, we're really talking about prevention, preparedness, suppression, rehabilitation, and recovery. So it's the business cycle of wildfire, and mitigation is really one part of that. But when we, looking at situational awareness, we want to look at what are the wildfire danger and wildfire behavior? Why are those critical? And I often get asked, what are the wildfire agency professionals using, and what equipment and technology standards do they have in place? And so what I often ask people back is, what are the areas of interest that you're concerned about, and have you completed a wildfire risk assessment? I mean, these are, are you collecting weather data? Are you collecting it like every day or hourly? Like, what is, you know, the starting point? What is your information base? What's the scale of your workload, and what resources do you have in place? What measures do you have, like trigger points in terms of like weather thresholds, where do you start pre-positioning resources? Do you have, you know, upscale your contracts for aviation resources? Have more people ready to go and respond. You know, how can the wildfire mitigation plans and how can your wildfire management practices be improved? What are the pain points? You know, stakeholders are a big part of that, because everyone has a vested interest, and you know, and everyone's impacted differently by wildfire. So, you know, a lot of people go, okay, well, we've identified our vulnerabilities now from a wildfire risk assessment. We're monitoring weather, and we understand our wildfire danger and what our exposure is. So what do you do now? I mean, that's the kind of what it comes down to. Is that's great that you have all that information. What do you do to, what are your calls to action now? What are the critical thresholds? Like in wildfire, we used to always just talk about the 30-30 crossover. We have 30 degrees Celsius and 30% relative humidity. And that means, okay, we're going to start getting fires now. Things are dry or will be dry, and we'll start getting fires, and especially when lightning comes in. And then we also talked about, you know, the 10 a.m. concept, where, you know, every wildfire, especially initial attack, you want to have it out by 10 a.m. the next day. Why? Because by 2 o'clock, it's going to be super hot, windy, and the fire has a really good potential to take off on you, even if you think you've got it. And then how about communication? Is everyone in the loop? Not just the people that are on the site that are working on the fire, but the general public. Everyone wants to know what's going on. If the media haven't found out from you already, someone's going to be posting picture or streaming video of a wildfire near their community through Twitter or some of the social media avenues. So we want to make sure that everyone's in the loop and has all the information. So situational awareness technologies can promote that. But at the end of the day, all this is, why is it being done? It's, you know, obviously there are big budgets out there, and there's a lot of costs and a lot of risk exposure. But at the end of the day, I like to believe that we're all doing this out of practices of prudence, because we don't want to see fatalities in a wildfire statistics column. We just want to keep everyone safe. So now we're getting into kind of more of the meat and potatoes of the talk today. And I hope there'll be some Q&A after, and maybe not just even just questions, but people that can comment and add to the discussion, because this is really about, you know, thought leadership and everyone sharing what they know, and have everyone included in the discussion about enhanced awareness using technology. So I created this slide as kind of more to show kind of some of the panels that we used to look at in our Emergency Operations Center and with the British Columbia Wildfire Service. And, you know, as I mentioned, the weather data and having an automated weather network is the pillar, the foundation of it all. And so on the bottom left screen, you see a map of the sort of southern half of British Columbia. And that was, you know, the spatial display of the wildfire risk we had. You know, we monitored the fire danger. We could click on any one of our automated weather stations at any minute of any day. We had about 300 weather stations, and we just click on any one of those that was, for example, in and around some of the lightning. You can see the blue dots, pluses and O's in the bottom right corner of that the provincial area there. And so when we saw red areas, the high, you know, heightened wildfire risk, and we'd be tracking lightning coming in from Washington or across the border in Idaho. And then that was really a trigger for us to pre-position resources. I mean, we'd pre-position resources from the areas of the province that were in the green and blue that didn't have a wildfire risk, and we'd take those resources and relocate them down in the south where we needed them, or vice versa, depending on, because in the spring we had wildfires in the north, and then in the summer it was all shifted down into the south. But the key point is that we could make advanced decisions in anticipation of new wildfires, so that we could catch them while they were small. So the lightning map at the bottom, where you see in the bottom left-hand corner, that lightning that was tracking in, we could pay particular attention to the pluses on there. The pluses meant that was actually striking the ground. And if we had a fine field moisture code of say 95 or higher, that meant that we had a 95% chance of ignition and a new fire from just about any one of those lightning strikes. So the circles in there, I know it's hard to see, it's a very small slide, but the circles represented cloud to cloud lightning. So we weren't that much interested in that stat or that data coming in, other than that we knew that there would be lots of activity, lots of wind increasing with that thunder cell coming in. And often we'd see a lot of cloud to cloud lightning before we started seeing ground strikes. So that was important, really important for us, because 50% of our annual wildfires, say 2,000 wildfires annually, 50% of those were caused by lightning. The other part of that, and then where the weather stations came in, was super important, is that the weather stations would tell us, like, we saw positive strikes, we saw lightning hitting the ground. Well, we could also pull up a weather station near there and see, well, is it getting any precip? Is that there's lightning? Yes, but it's getting pounded with rain right now. So we could also really get really linear, very microscopic with our understanding of what might be going on out there. And then once we identified there's a high chance of a new fire starting, then we would launch aviation resources, do air patrols. But again, these are very expensive and you can't fly everywhere all the time, and they're limited by fuel and range. So you really have a small window of opportunity to detect fires. Now, thankfully, because we had air tankers, we had about 15 air tankers that were airborne, and somewhere between 8 and 80 helicopters flying around the province at any given time during the summer to fight fires. They were also reporting new smokes on their way to and from incidents. So there is that. And we also, for many decades, didn't have people with smartphones out there that could call in and report a wildfire from very remote areas when they're doing outdoor activities, recreation and whatnot. So anyway, those are sort of the three sort of key areas: the wildfire danger displayed, tracking lightning, understanding where your new fires are. Another part of that is, and it's an emerging technology, and I'm going to talk quite a bit more about that a little bit later, is the automated camera observation systems. That's something that we didn't have when I was sitting in the hot seat, so to speak. At your beck and call, the opportunity to pull up a camera system and have a look at what's going on out there, have a look at that smoke, combined with a legacy experience and knowledge of that terrain and that fuel type, what exactly the fire might do that day, that hour. But having the ability to report new wildfires, like the bottom right-hand screen, you'll see, if you can see it, it's very small, apologies for that, but there's a crosshair there. And that crosshair is where someone is standing physically on the phone with a 1-800-fire reporting dispatcher. And, some of the first questions are, just get a geographic location. What are you seeing? How large is the fire? And, one of the first questions is, are people and property at threat? And if they say yes, then there's a buttons off screen there, but in the panel in our emergency operations center, you just hit an interface button, and that's basically our WUI button. So if there are people or property involved, there's a community at risk, we hit that button, it automatically launched air tankers at our provincial air tanker base. So before we have any of the other data, like a lat and long and a fire number and anticipated fire behavior, they can at least get the pilots in the aircraft, get the wheels rolling. So by the time they take off, they're actually getting the lat and long, a bearing, and some limited wildfire behavior information. And more of that would be populated and shared on the forums as they were en route to the fire. So this is like at the height of efficiency here. It's like a chess game, and you're moving the pieces based on the move by the other opponent. And in this case, the opponent was the wildfire. So the other benefit was the ability to reroute. So they were on, say, an air tanker group was en route to a new fire, and a new priority came up. We had a general public calling in saying they're in the Okanagan, they're near Kelowna, for example, very populated area in our wine region, where is a very well-established fire regime, fires annually. So they're calling in and saying, well, then there's this fire and it's really close to the community. And so we could reroute those air tankers. They're en route to some other target. We could say, okay, we've got a higher priority. Here's your new lat and long, here's your new bearing, and just head there. We'll give you more information on the fly, literally. So the ability to do that using situational awareness technologies is super key. course, the tracking of the resources is important, and I'll talk a little bit about this later when we talk about trends and the gaps and the technologies that are out there. But we've been tracking aircraft and mobile assets, trucks and whatnot for a long time. It's getting to the point now where we're starting to track people where they are. And I don't just mean on the fire line, I mean also when we're doing cross-border resource sharing. Often we have people coming from other countries and other states and provinces helping out with the wildfires. And unfortunately, and it's been my experience in doing that job, both on the ground and in the air, but also in the dispatch centers and the emergency ops centers, that people literally get lost. We don't know exactly where they are every single day or every single hour of every day. So there's some catch up that happens that shouldn't have to happen. We need to know where those people are in real time. And of course, the fire status and monitoring is super important because you need to understand, okay, before we need to make decisions on requesting more resources, whether it's through CIFC or NIFC, out of state or out of province resources that are needed, or requesting firefighters from Australia or Mexico or wherever they might be needed from. So when we look at situational awareness, this graphic kind of shows a very isolated area, but try to use your imagination and look beyond the landscape there. And that's where you would see our fixed remote automated weather stations. Closer to town, you might see some cellular towers or lookout towers, or you have distribution poles where compact weather stations and automated camera systems could be installed. FTS is also manufacturing and offering the air quality stations as well to manage and monitor particulate matter in our environment, because these fires are impacting communities not just from the threat of the wildfire itself, but the major amounts of toxic smoke that settles in on the community. So those are sort of a snapshot of kind of where this technology fits in the landscape and how it works. And it all comes into the FTS 360 software application, which I'm going to talk to you about in a little bit. Before we get to there though, I mentioned a lot about the remote automated weather stations, which are in very remote areas. They're in areas that are not usually around a lot of people, although that's changing day by day. But what we learned years ago was the need for wildfire professionals to have portable solutions. So the IRAWs, or what we call the quick deploy weather station, was traditionally used for prescribed burning, but later applications saw that, hey, on large scale wildfires, even though we're getting RAWs data, there are areas where we have gaps. So one person can set up within 15 minutes without any tools a on-demand, real-time radio transmitted weather station to disseminate the information to all the people that need to see it. The weather data can be transmitted by GOES satellite. Comes equipped with all the same sensor package that are in the RAW station. So you're getting all that data collection from a portable offering, and then additional sensors can be added to that. Recently, FTS partnered with IntelliSense. They're known for their products and applications in the military realm. Their micro weather sensor has been a great addition to the offerings in situational awareness technology with hyperlocal environmental monitoring. Weather data transmitted over cellular or Iridium satellite through FTS 360. You can get 5-minute to hourly frequency of data collection and dissemination. Simple to use, weighs 3.5 pounds, fits in a backpack, hence the military application. But these can also be mounted on poles, like distribution poles, or any infrastructure that's out there, including vehicle mount, which I think is one of the sort of key differentiators in this sort of portable solution. That there are a lot of vehicles going to and from wildfire incidents, to and from emergency evacuations, or any emergency incident where you need weather. Well, you can have that attached to the vehicle that's going there. Super important to have. And then we're finding with the utility customers that have, their line people that have trucks that are going out to service their distribution lines, that can now have automated weather transmitting through this micro weather sensor, and in addition has camera technology included with that, which is really important for that enhanced situational awareness. And then FTS responded to, and I mentioned before about the RAWs network and the gaps. the need for portable solutions, but there's also compact automated weather stations that can be, more of a fixed install, but on existing infrastructure. Portable, yes, because it can be moved from one location to the other, but the intent here is more that it gets attached to, say, a distribution pole or in areas of responsibility where electric utilities want to have a lot of data. They want to fill in the gaps and have a really inexpensive option that gives really the same amount of sort of scientific grade sensor weather data from the RAWs or the iRAWs quick deploys, all in a compact solution. So it's portable, tripod, pole mount, weather data transmit over cellular or GOES satellite, and through the FTS 360 platform, a 1 minute hourly frequency of weather data broadcasting. Easy remote configuration and data manipulation through the software in the FTS 360. So as I mentioned before, the camera technology is really, what I think is one of the fundamental innovations that's coming to light, and getting that visibility out there, super important. It's a portable solution. Was being used, initially was being used on prescribed burns, and obviously kind of like the iRAWs and the quick deploy weather station quickly got adapted to having visibility on large scale wildfires, maybe that are in remote areas, but they're under observation or being monitored to see what the fire behavior looks like and see if we need to make decisions around evacuating a community or mobilize more assets into the area. Also looking what the smoke's doing, that has coming into play more and more as communities are sprawling out into the landscape, into these remote areas and impacted by smoke than ever before. So the RAOS system, remote automated observation system, can capture and transmit images, still images, or video clips over cellular or satellite, given the situational awareness wherever you are. Customizable, you can select an infrared camera or a thermal camera to go with the panorama camera. Time-lapse feature gives you the ability to monitor environmental changes over time. It's not just looking at the wildfire and the smoke, it's also you can actually have visualization on cloud cells coming in, and we all know that big thunder cells push fire around and they create more lightning and stuff like that. So it's good to have visibility on that. And as I mentioned before, not always having that air patrol or that aviation resources flying over the areas to give you visibility, not always there. The other part of that is, aircraft, they're transmitting through the radio what they're seeing and not always capture the exact, representation of what's actually going on out there. Whereas someone in the emergency operations center or an incident command post that's looking at images, whether they're still or streaming video, can see that and make a whole other set of decisions based on their experience. So these images and video can be done on demand, triggered by a weather event or on a schedule. And the FTS 360 really gives the complete system control of what you're looking at and also the alerts that you want to see. So taking the portable RAOS to another level is the pan tilt zoom, the PTZ option on that. This is really sort of the next level for wildfire managers and emergency responders, just to have a quick glance on a regular basis of what's really going out there and seeing what the exposure is and making informed decisions. So this PTZ camera system gives the 1080p video streaming with 30 frames per second, 360-degree field of view with 30-time optical zoom. And through the FTS 360 web-based software, gives you ability to control the camera, view live streaming, full azimuth and weather station information overlay. Hard to see, but the top right image where you see the landscape and the blue sky, that black banner there, you'll see some white text on there. That's all the weather station parameters, all the sensors, everything that's on there, temperature, relative humidity, wind speed and direction, precip, all the good stuff is on there, including fuel moisture, fuel temperature, through those sensors that we offer in our weather packages. So all this being done through a secure, reliable web-based software platform is super critical, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But the FTS 360 Overwatch, which is kind of you're seeing the images on the right there, that gives you the ability to select the content, whether it's for extended teams like your incident command teams, your firefighters, emergency managers, or to be pushed out to general public. So the FTS 360 Internet of Things with a mobile app, web-based platform, super important, giving the images and video, but customizable for agile programming, for environmental advanced calculations, intelligent alerting, and the full configuration of the equipment that's out in the field or near communities. Supports GOES, Iridium, and cellular telemetry, edge to cloud security with encryption and user authentication. As I mentioned before, the camera control, optional lighting and air quality data. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But the custom alerts, the automatic call to action triggers, these are really where it's key. It's you have certain environmental parameters, like for example, I talked about the temperature reaching a certain threshold, or your relative humidity goes into single digits. I mean, those are key critical threshold. So maybe at that time when you see, those temperature and RH reaching a threshold, maybe some wind at a threshold, and there's no precip in the air, maybe that's a trigger to get that camera spooling up and start sending out images when you want to see them, when you have that kind of critical, weather dynamic out there. This has the FTS 360 has a direct API integration also with third-party analytics packages, because many of our customers have these third-party analytics packages. iOS, Android, and Windows mobile apps for the on-site station configuration. So people that are out in remote areas or at these stations can actually configure them to see the data that they want to see, set the frequency of the data collection, and the telemetry options that go with all that. And again, the Overwatch giving, whether you keep it internal or you want to push it out to general public, there are pros and cons to both. You have that freedom and flexibility of the information sharing. So I mentioned about some of the add-on features of FTS 360 to support the complete situational awareness package, and that really, as I mentioned about wildfires and expanding smoke in our communities, and having the ability to monitor the air quality. So in there, through the FTS 360 software, you can have the predefined air quality index tables, and have a color-coded display, spatial display of the air quality in any given region. And then the lightning overlay, which is really exciting feature to have through one of our sister companies at Earth Networks, showing the positive and negative charges of lightning events, dangerous thunderstorm alerting, super important for monitoring weather, not just necessarily for wildfires, but also for, say, electric utility operations where, wind events, dangerous thunderstorms coming in can, cause branches to come down on their lines, start new fires, or have disruption to power to their communities and their customers. So super important to have that technology capability. And then also in their Overwatch, as I mentioned, incident responders, they'll have real access to real-time data and make the critical decisions at the critical times, while also giving access to public. Super important, again, to have the ability to share with general public that are, they always want to know what's going on all the time, especially during wildfire season. So a little bit more, just this slide sort of geared towards the electric utility companies, but applies to others as well. But sort of the four key areas of wildfire mitigation planning are looking at enhanced system protection, system hardening, preventative maintenance, and strategic operational practices, SOPs. So when we look at, in terms of electrical utility customers and end users, looking at weather network data across their areas of interest, and the need for enhanced situational awareness by identifying changes in the environment that result in the increased wildfire risk. So they're data intensive, and so there's a lot of the electric utility companies are investing a lot in enhancing their systems to have more modern solutions out there. So data is a big thing. They want more data. They want to see more granularity. Well, that includes weather data as well. System hardening in wildfire mitigation planning with utility companies is more looking at hardening poles, replacing aged wooden infrastructure with synthetic or steel poles that are more resistant to wildfire. But in that, compact weather stations, automated observation cameras can be installed on this existing infrastructure and give the ability to see get alerts to your mobile device or see images, streaming video, again just increasing the situational awareness to the people in the field and also the people in, say, the emergency operations centers, and everyone in between. Preventative maintenance, or really a lot of that's a focus on vegetation management. They have people dedicated to this job and this function. In the wildland fire management agencies, it's we call them fuels managers. Fire people look at vegetation as fuel, so just different nomenclature there. But at the end of the day, we're really looking at an abundance of fuel and vegetation out there, and that these kinds of situational awareness technologies can monitor that. They can monitor the weather, because these fuels are being impacted on by the minute by what the weather's doing. So these technologies can help determine the areas that are the driest. Even sensors that can detect the fuel moisture and fuel temperature, and give you a much better insight into what the fire behavior can be. Because once that fire starts, of course it's important to know how the fire started and why it started and take steps to prevent that in the future. But once the fire is going, it doesn't actually care that much how it got started. It's just rolling along, it's being pushed by the wind, it's burning up slope, it's just going to go where the fuel is. So important to know what's happening with your fuel and how it relates to the weather that's being changing by the minute. SOPs, really this is sort of at the forefront of having an established automated weather network, understanding what your needs are. It's hard to know what resources you need, what kind of people you need involved, what technologies you need, without knowing what's going on in the changing weather environment. So having wildfire mitigation plans that include the ability for weather forecasting and predictive services is super important to understand what the wildfire risk is, and then make the key decisions regarding the operation following that. So really, I just wanted to kind of summarize, and this will be hopefully more of a trigger point for some discussion with everyone that's involved today. I appreciate people, asking questions in our Q&A that's coming up, and also, share experiences. And this is really about knowledge share. I have what some would say an abundance of wildfire experience, but I certainly don't have all the answers. So really, for me, just sharing what I know and a little bit insight into my background and experience in this webinar is really to just share that for companies like Forest Technology Systems have the sort of 40 years of experience with weather monitoring and predictive services that have been really successful in the wildland fire management agencies. And a lot of this knowledge and expertise can be extended out to electric utility companies or any agency that needs to manage emergencies. So when we talk about the key takeaways of situational awareness, really it's weather monitoring, predictive services, observational technologies. These all can help any organization reduce exposure to risk, increase the safety of the people that work out in the field, and improve chances of success when dealing with just about any emergency situation, not just wildfires. So as I mentioned before a couple times, it starts with knowing what your workload is, especially when it comes to wildfire. So what is the weather doing? What kind of fuel do you have out there? What's the topography in the areas where you have historical fires over decades? And what does that look like in terms of in the context of an expanding population and an expanding WUI, wildland urban interface? So I always say, right at the front end, a wildfire risk assessment is super important, because you're not just looking at the weather and the fuel and the shape of the land dynamics, the key fundamentals of fire behavior. You're looking at that all in the context of what's there now. There's cell towers, there are all kinds of infrastructure out there. There were resorts, there are vacation properties, people with cabins, fishing lodges, and then as you get closer to the town, all kinds of other infrastructure and people in their homes. So, it starts with that. Accurate real-time weather data is super critical to the predictive forecasting part, but in terms of the reactive forecasting, understanding about fire modeling solutions and everything else that's out there. There are lots of different fire modeling solutions out there. It starts with having accurate real-time weather data. So having the real-time detection, monitoring of live wildfire conditions through automated camera systems, super critical. Increase your ability for real-time decision making on the fly, because things are moving very, very quickly. When we have, I mentioned about in BC, British Columbia, we had 2,000 wildfires in a season. Well, in one day, I remember in 1990, we had 200 new fires in one day. And I would say probably half of those were initial attack failures. So we had massive fires in many regions. So these tech tools allow the fuller picture. We talk about situational awareness. That's something that's a little bit more acute. What we should really be talking about is common operating picture, because this is where we talk about across a region, not just a town or a district or a county. We're talking now about a region across a state, or say like Western USA. So it's a much bigger scope of operation, and this is where others, that some have a lot of resources and others don't have very many. So if there's an ability to share the resources where they're needed most, we'll keep the most amount of people safe from wildfire. And that's really what it comes down to, right? Is that we're all talking about this and interested in this because it's about the safety of the frontline workers out there that are protecting our communities, and it's about reducing our environmental impacts and the impact on our economies in our communities. So I've spoken quite a bit. I'm not used to speaking that long in any one junction of time. I really, like I said, appreciate and welcome questions from everyone participating today, and I hope that some others can share some of their knowledge and experiences in this webinar today. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bill to manage any questions we have coming in the Q&A chat.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate the content here. We did have a couple questions come in. Well, we had one question come in twice, and that was whether this presentation was being recorded and whether people could have a copy of it afterwards to share with some other colleagues. And it is being recorded, and we're happy to share it afterwards. Or if you wanted to have a more detailed discussion, of course, we're happy to do that. And then just monitoring, we did have a question come in here in terms of looking at wildfire mitigation planning and utilities. We know you've been doing a lot of speaking at some of these events. What are some of the major gaps or areas of improvement that you see that we need to address, Sean?
Yeah, I think I get asked that a lot. What are the gaps out there? And the wildfire community, wildland management agencies and the wildfire community, and I should say this too, a lot of the electrical utility companies, although you see in the news a lot of the sort of doom and gloom and the negative side of that, but it should be acknowledged that in the last sort of 6 to 8 months in my interactions with the extensively and exclusively with the electric utility companies, they're doing a lot out there. They're investing tens of millions of dollars annually in wildfire mitigation planning. So but these, especially the wildfire community, they're experts at what they do. Their training and experience prepare them a lot. They're accessing a lot of data. They have access to a lot of data, and so they're using that to make the critical decisions to make sure that lives and properties aren't impacted. And the technology needs to evolve, right? There's so much data out there. Some of that technology needs to evolve to keep up with the demand. So really, in terms of like FTS, what I'm proud to be a part of is that all of the technology that's been developed. If you look at the RAWS station, 40 years of development, all the insight into what features that weather station should have come from wildfire professionals. So, us and other companies, other vendors of this technology really need to always listen to who's using this stuff. What do they want to see? Well, why do they want to see that? maybe there's a better way to look at that, is, and how that data is captured. But I will say this, the preparedness part, like prevention is once you understand the risk, and communicating that through radio ads, or through multimedia venues, social media and television, and letting people know. But preparedness is a big part of it all, because preparedness comes down to the training, contracts for aerial firefighting resources, contract firefighting, like all the things that go into making sure there are people and equipment ready for when the wildfire starts. So it's super important that we look at, say, the National Fire Danger Rating System and the fire codes that are calculated hourly or by the minute on weather data that's out there, and then infilling that with portable solutions, or compact solutions that can get the weather data where it's missing, and equipping the emergency management community with all these tools, giving them more visibility at the early stages of a new wildfire by having these camera technologies that are out there now, automated, set to alert, set to weather events, or they just say, hey, I'm interested in that area right now, I know there's lots of activity, I'll just turn it on and zoom in and see what's going on. Or someone flags, hey, we got a new smoke here, and then a very seasoned fire professional can kind of step to the screen and have a look at that and go, yeah, we're going to need tankers on this now, or sit back because it's not a high priority, it's in a really remote area and we don't need to pull resources from higher priorities to that one. Increased public demand for air quality information. I talked about the air quality sensors. There's more and more requests for that kind of technology out there. We're getting every day. And then we've got the ever expanding wildland urban interface out there, very public, the media is involved. So the public and the media all want to see this information. So having this, enhanced situational awareness and sharing with the public, sharing with the media what the risk actually is, makes it a lot easier. For example, when you need to evacuate a community, it's not like, they just found out that day and they got to pack up all their, their animals and family and not necessarily in that order, but, all their, worldly possessions, get it in a car and get out of there. If they know weeks in advance that the risk is increasing by, the data that's coming from these situational awareness technology tools, then it's less of a surprise and more advanced warning can be made, more preparation. And so, the other part is with many jurisdictions, more aggressive fires, longer wildfire seasons, and with that comes, more wildfire suppression resources at play out there. So there's a much greater need for coordination of those resources. You got thousands of wildland firefighters out there, structural firefighters, you got ground and air support, personnel and equipment. So it comes down to the best utilization of the resources. So that starts with tracking where they are, knowing where they're assigned, what the risks they're exposed to. And that's a big part of knowing where they are, because you're also monitoring the risk because it's changing by the hour. So if you've got people in a certain area, and this is what I kind of highlight with the electric utility companies, that, I hope that they're monitoring where they are as well as monitoring the risks, because they're sending, line people out there to get the power back on. But like I was building helipads for helicopters to bring more equipment and people on years ago, rappelling into a very dense forested area and cutting out a big swath of forests for something to land. Like I said, when I took that fire behavior analyst course, I realized how exposed my crew was, sitting there for 8 hours, 2 guys on a saw, cutting away, not knowing that we were sitting basically on a ticking time bomb. And if there was, the fire had, a little wind direction, we would have been sitting ducks. Maybe have to deploy a fire shelter or get extracted by the hoist or something like that. But, those are situations that can be avoided by, filling in these gaps with weather data, with camera systems, and, some of this other technology that currently exists. Yeah, and the other part of that, with tracking people, I should say that what I found in my experience with especially cross-border resource sharing and agreements and whatnot is that, we generally have like a 14-day operational period or 18-day maximum, and people need time off because, accidents happen when people get fatigued and, they don't make good decisions. So, tracking where people are is also really important to making sure that they get days of rest. So I would say that as another gap for technology developments out there.
Thanks, Sean. We've had a couple other questions come in here, but we're at the end of the hour. So what I'm going to do is we'll note the questions down and we'll follow up directly after the call with any of the questions. And wanted to thank everyone for their time, and I'll pass it back to you there, Sean, for a final comment.
Great, thanks, Bill. I'll just hope I can get it on there. I hope you're seeing that slide there now again. My contact details are on there. I welcome anyone that wants more information or wanted a copy of the slide presentation to please email me or call. I'm happy to talk to you. I'd also like to highlight that this is the first of about 12 webinars that we're doing between now and November. We're calling them Wildfire Wednesdays. They're every 2 weeks. So I hope you can all take time to register. We'll be sending out mailers, especially to everyone that participated today. If you'd like to see more, please join us, and feel free to bring more people and bring your questions and your knowledge share. We'd love to hear from everyone. So thank you everyone for participating, and thank you, Bill, for hosting, and hope everyone has a good day.